Anxiety. Welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders and getting your life back. This is a question and answer based podcast. If you have questions about OCD and anxiety stuff, and anxiety related things, or why your cousin does weird things, or why your spouse does something you don't quite understand, this is the podcast for you. So if you have questions about OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders, you can go over to Fearcast Podcast, and you can send me a message over there, fearcastpodcast.com. You can send me a message over there. You can also click on the speech pipe button, click on that, record your voice, and that will get to me. I will listen to it, consider it, and likely put it up in a future episode, as is what's happening today with Ed's question. So I've got a couple of questions in the hopper coming. So I really appreciate all these questions. You can send me a question there. You can obviously send me a question over at Instagram. I am Fearcast Podcast over there. So anyhow, any way you want to get me a question, great. So we've got a bunch of questions coming, and also some interviews and things like that. So, but I really like this question from Ed. I'll post this up here, or I'll play it here in just a moment. But it's a good question. I think really kind of straddles that line between is it OCD, is it social anxiety, is it both, is it kind of the same thing? Doesn't matter. Anyways, so I'll talk a little bit about that, but I think by the time I'm going to release this, it's kind of getting on towards Christmas. I'm unlikely to put up an episode the last week of Christmas, just to let everybody, or the last week of December after Christmas, because I'm going to be out of the office, and I do a quick turnaround on these episodes. So I don't have a ton of backlog where I like record one, and then it's like I have 5 going, or I have 5 weeks in advance, so I can have some kind of runway. I record it, I put it up, record it, put it up. But I've got a little bit of backlog with one podcast, so here we are. So this is probably going to go up somewhere kind of later December. So if you are somewhere in the future, I don't know what has happened, if anything weird has happened. I don't know if anything great has happened. So, all right, let's try to record these in advance just to see. All right, here we go. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that crazy thing happened, right? Well, it certainly changed the way we see that thing, right? And those people as well. All right, let me try another one. Okay. What great news. I know, right? It's going to change everything in the way that we see it. Oh, goodness. All right, let me try the last one. This has been a real catastrophe, and my heart goes out to those people in those places, and thoughts and prayers indeed to all of them. So, all right, so I hope I just kind of covered my bases. We'll see what happens. If you are watching this on YouTube, you will see that the Christmas December mustache is coming back. I typically do something weird with my facial hair, and it was last year. It was this mustache nonsense, and then it just kind of carried out for about 6 more months in the new year, and then I trimmed it, and then laziness brings it back, as most facial hair starts is by laziness, and then you just keep committing to your laziness, and there you are. You're in that situation. So here we are. I don't know if anything is going to happen with the top bit, but if it does, you will all find out eventually. All right. How about enough yammering about this? Let's get on to Ed's question here.
Hi, Kevin. I've got what I think is a fairly uncommon OCD theme, which is a fear of being socially humiliated. So to give an example, I'm in a group chat with some friends who started talking about who in our friend group could beat who in a fist fight. I do judo and I'm fairly strong, so a lot of people said I could probably win, but I'm afraid that if they hadn't said that, or if majority opinion later decides I would lose the fight, that they wouldn't be able to talk to me ever again without thinking of or reminding me of that, or that I wouldn't be able to talk to them ever again without thinking of it, and that I'd feel ashamed and embarrassed forever as a result. In actuality, I know this is fairly normal, lighthearted fun for them, but I've been thinking about it all day. I even tried to play along for a bit, thinking it might prove to me that I don't really have to be afraid of this, but eventually I became too anxious, mentioned it was activating my OCD, which was an understatement, and decided I should mute the conversation and not look at it again. The problem is, I know that conversation is still going on, and that there will be more messages if I ever come back to it. It's really hard for me to bear knowing that it's there, but my question is what I'm doing now avoidance, or is it resisting a compulsion to check the thread? I feel like I'm being pulled in both directions. So I'd like to know what I should do about this, and more generally, some exposures I could do to make this not feel so apocalyptic. Thanks.
All right, Ed, thank you so much for sending that question in. Now, he did send in a little bit of an additional email that kind of added a little bit clarifying information, but I'll add that in a bit. But I just kind of wanted to get on and start kind of addressing this. So first off, as I mentioned at the top, um, this kind of straddles that line, right? And you said it's an OCD theme, so OCD theme of being socially humiliated, right? Now, one of the problems that we encounter, and we've talked about this before, and I apologize, the problem that we encounter with like having all these different designations and titles for for different subtypes is that we can get lost then in the meaning of it, right? Lost then in sometimes I've heard some people can expand out and expand out so far that what they call an OCD obsession is actually just a different diagnosis, or is better explained by something else, which is part of the diagnostic process. So fear about being socially humiliated, to a certain degree, one can argue that that would be social anxiety, right? Because it can be an obsessive thought. It can be a worry about being ridiculed, a worry about being made fun of, a worry about rejection that causes marked anxiety and marked distress that can result in avoidance and rumination and checking and all of that. I did not pull up the diagnostic criteria. I realized I started reading it and went, I remember the last time I read from the DSM and it sounded dry. And I did not want to do that to you all again. So, point is, there's a lot of overlap between what you're describing as socially humiliation kind of OCD versus social anxiety. And um, my point is, this is where I think it's important to think about anxiety and OCD and all that as the spectrum, right? It's all kind of the same thing, but it has different flavors and different styles, and some things are more important and other things are less important. But it's all kind of described or goes through that a similar sort of process. Anyways, maybe I'm the only one getting hung up on the title and the diagnosis, but as a clinician, we love our diagnoses. So that's what comes up to me. So I'm going to treat this in kind of a broad sort of way rather than in a very strict, this is social anxiety treatment, this is OCD treatment. I'm going to treat it, sort of broadly. I hope that's all right with everybody. All right. So as I was as I was listening to your question, Ed, it sounded like certainly you were triggered by an imagined situation, not an actual one, right? Because you said your friend said in the text thread. Because what I understood. Let me go back. What I understood in the text thread or in your question. So there was a conversation happening with all your friends, and as typical friendly jibber jabber goes on, someone makes a comment or presents a hypothetical, and everyone talks about said hypothetical, and it's all fun and games, and jokey and hilarity ensues, and friendship and bonding happens. So great. But in this case, it was about whether or not who would beat up who in a fight. I guess a typical question. And you turned out to be the winner in that. They think that you are the most dangerous person in the group. That's what they're telling you. And they're afraid of you. They respect you. They fear you. But is there any difference, really? Anyways, so this whole question is going on, but they've said they think that you would win. And then your brain promptly said, sounds great. What if, and then it went off to the races. What if they didn't say that? What if they said something that you don't want to happen, right? What if they said something that maybe goes against your character? Maybe they said something they had a hypothetical that maybe it would put you in a one down position. Wouldn't that be terrible? And it would, I guess, except when it's that, as you said, the hypothetical, right? It's just friendly banter, right? But again, OCD doesn't care about that stuff. It wants to say, all right, I hear you, I see you, but let's go off over there. Let's go into fantasy land and let's imagine just some crazy stuff. Let's separate from what they are actually saying and let's think about something that has nothing to do with reality, nothing to do with what they are saying, and nothing to say about, and nothing of what they would likely say. Oh, this is a game anxiety loves to play. When it goes, let's think about something Let's imagine that they would say this. I know Stephanie and Brian and Jamal, they would never say these things, but anxiety's interpretation of them would definitely say those things. So we're going to play that game and buy into them as my internalized image of who I think that person is. And I'm going to respond to these imagined situations and I'm going to get wrapped up in a ball about how that would feel. I think hopefully that sounds familiar to some people, not just me perhaps. All right, point is that you started responding to something imagined, right? And you were ruminating about what they didn't say rather than what they did say. I think there's an important point, and I know my ICBT friends out there are saying, yep, we know what that's about. But it's important to take a step back from this when all of this is happening and when you start catching yourself going in loops on this stuff and saying, from a grounded perspective, what did my senses perceive? What did I read? What did I hear? Right? And what seems to be most logically true? For common sense? What would it say? What from what I know about my friends? What would they likely be saying? And what would likely happen, right? Are your friends the group of people who tend to never let somebody off the hook if they said or did something weird or off color, right? Are they the sort of people that would trudge something up or hold something over your head or remind you repeatedly and try to embarrass you, try to humiliate you in that way? Now, I recognize that some friends, especially you dude friends out there, I've been a dude a long time, and this is our love language. This is how we communicate. But in reality, is that what they do, or are they something different, right? And it's important to pay attention to and lean heavily on what you honestly think. Now, what anxiety says is true, but what you, deep in your heart of hearts, believe is true, what's most likely to be true. Okay, so again, it's a great example of like that difference between reality and OCD engagement, right? Reality is it was lighthearted silliness that you guys were just jibber jabbering around. The obsession is about something completely different, right? And to that end, I wonder what this tapped into for you, right? So you said, you do jujitsu, judo. What did you say? You do judo, right? And it sounds like you're kind of ripped. So I'm just also going to assume, because I'm a pansy therapist, that you would destroy me as well, which really is not saying much. But it's you are kind of that dude, the strong guy, right? So I wonder what was this tapping into? Was this a fear? And I'm just going to speculate. Ed, you're not in the room, so I have to imagine, and you know where imagination gets us. All right, so here's what is it, the fear? Well, what if I'm actually weak? What if it is true that I am weak? Well, that would suck, wouldn't it? Well, what is it, or that you're going to be reminded of that, and that you are going to be reminded that you are weak? Well, I don't want either one of those things. Or is it like, take a step back? You're not, but you're perceived as weak, right? Other people think that you're weak and can't, quote, handle yourself and can't handle a fight, which somehow makes you less than, right? Why do dudes have these conversations? Dudes are the worst. So, but what is that story that's bringing you back to? Because that is the story that you're trying to defend against. That is the narrative that is the vulnerability. That's the vulnerable thing. You're going, I don't want this to be true. This makes me sad and scared and annoyed and frustrated and hurt at the possibility that maybe this thing could be true. Now, first off, as you go through treatment, as you develop these things, what we want to be able to do is to acknowledge that there are these uncomfortable thoughts related to who we are and what may be true, right? Imagine stories. What if this were true? And acknowledge that sometimes those imagined stories hurt our feelings, and those imagined stories make us feel things we don't want to feel. If I start thinking about my kids dying, I start to feel sad. If I think about my wife or my parents or my, brother, like just sad stuff, I start to feel sad, right? Now, fill in the blank with another emotion and another thought. It's that's kind of how that works. And we also want to acknowledge that that's kind of what our human brain does. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's something great about that. The great part about that is that that's what makes us empathize with other people. It's what helps us to, feel what someone else is feeling. It's how movies work, right? If you felt nothing all the time, movies would mean nothing to you. Point is, it's that it's not bad that you feel it. And we want to work towards being tolerant of the fact that we're feeling feelings. And in that moment, you were feeling a sad, or you're feeling an anxious, or you're feeling a fear, right? And a worry that you might be socially humiliated. And no one wants to be socially humiliated, generally speaking. Nobody wants to be socially humiliated. Okay. So why that's important is as you go through these exposures, as you go through exposures to this and start thinking about what is the thing that got you amped up and started to ruminate and start checking and start avoiding, why? And then what would it mean if you were to not do those things? What would it mean if you were to pull back on those inappropriate responses and go and live your life? What is the thing that you're vulnerable to, the thing that may happen? Okay. All right. So you asked a very specific question as well. You said, all right, is muting the conversation, was it avoidance or was it resisting checking the thread? All right. Okay. So was it avoidance? Remember, avoidance is a compulsion to reduce anxiety and avoid a trigger, right? Which can further reduce anxiety or reduce the presence of anxiety, the possibility of feeling anxiety, right? But a compulsion is something that reduces anxiety, and then conversely, an exposure is something that increases anxiety. All right, that's an important conversation for another time, perhaps. But is it avoidance? Because well, is it bad that you were avoiding reading that conversation? Or was it a good thing? Were you resisting a compulsion? I'm assuming the compulsion of checking the thread was then looking for reassurance that was looking for reassurance opposing the feared story, or goodness, looking for confirmation potentially that it was confirming your feared story, right? Again, the importance of the feared story. What is it that you were looking for? All right. Now, which one were you doing? The answer is both. The answer is both. All right. So you were avoiding the conversation, and I think a lot of us would understand why, right? But it may not be the most effective and helpful thing. Was it also reducing or resisting checking the thread and resisting getting into the compulsion of reassurance seeking? Potentially also yes, right? And I say potentially also yes to the idea that is that something that you tend to do? Is that a compulsion that you know that you are about? You are likely someone who would check for reassurance. You would read threads to make sure, and you would analyze what people were saying. And we can go into other compulsions that people might do. So one thing that I would, so the answer is both. One thing I would encourage as an alternative to that is instead just actually just living your values. I can imagine that you're someone who wants to be a good friend, wants to be an interactive friend, wants to communicate, engage with that jibber jabber. Man, I'm using that term a lot today. But engage in conversations with your friends. What you're talking about doing is that you did neither one of those things, or you did none of that. Instead, you avoided you living your life, right? At its basis, at the bottom line of all the things that we are trying to do on this, whether it is social anxiety or OCD or anything else, it is doing fewer compulsions and living more of your life. That's what we're about here, right? So what it sounded like, and what happens with compulsive behavior is that we disengage from our life, right? We stop doing the things that we want to do, and instead we do this thing that we don't care about. Ed, I want you to do stuff that you care about. So if that means spending time with your friends and having anxiety there at the same time, then that's what I want you to do, right? Generally speaking, things that are of value to us come at a cost. They're difficult, they're hard to do. And sometimes that comes with having to experience discomfort and anxiety, etc. So that's something that I want you to consider is, are you living your life and doing what's of value and important to you, or are you disengaging from it, right? So I'd encourage you to have the conversation, unmute it, participate, and note that you're going to have anxiety as part of that, right? You can engage like that, maybe they're going to say something, maybe they're going to change their mind, maybe that story is going to happen. Right? Maybe they are going to instead flip it and say, well, what if Ed loses, and what if, Ryan over there, I'm trying to think of a fictitious name. What if that dude, what if he could beat you up, and Ed, you're the loser in this? Maybe. Okay. Well, let's talk about, you can play in that situation, right? Continue to engage with that in a playful way. And note that this whole extra story then about what it's going to mean, what it's going to say about you, what's going to happen in the future, etc. We don't know that because we're not there yet. Instead, we're here, right? Resist checking old messages, but respond to that conversation as necessary, right? So again, going back to it, it's that like the purpose of this therapy, the purpose of all therapy, and purpose of this podcast is to encourage and help folks to go live their life, right? So another thing to think about with all of therapy is we want to learn that we can handle anxiety and that we can live our preferred life by your desired actions, right? That goes back to that desire to be in a conversation with them, to talk with them, to be in text threads, right? But that you can make space for that anxiety. That it can feel uncomfortable and you can send that text, right? That you can be anxious and go to a meeting, anxious and give a presentation in class, right? Fill in the blank, right? We also learn that our feared outcome is really unlikely to happen. Now, I'll say this. It's unlikely but not impossible. We aren't trying to prove that our fear is never, ever, ever going to happen because that's reassurance seeking. Instead, we're saying it's really unlikely, but also if it does happen, that might suck, but I'll deal with it then. I'll figure it out, right? Because I got this. I can do this. I can figure out that situation in the future, right? OCD is going to say you can't handle the possibility of being humiliated. So what you should do is you should eliminate the possibility of being humiliated, or you should stop thinking about it. What that's going to do is it's going to ask you to slowly back away from your friends and to avoid, right? To be in relationship with other people is to be open to humiliation and to be open to hurt feelings and to be open to emotional harm or awkwardness or hurting someone else's feelings, right? As well as all the other good stuff, right? But that's what we're asking you to do, Ed, is to live at risk of these things happening. Not to necessarily make it happen, but to live at risk, like everybody else, right? And I mean, to be fair, I had that fear with this podcast. I just, back in my head, I still have this fear. It's like, all right, I'm putting my voice out there. I'm recording it into the microphone and putting it onto the interwebs, which goes out into space or wherever the heck it goes. And it's out there. And I don't know what I say on these podcasts sometimes. Like people go like, oh, you said this thing in episode like 55. And I'm like, cool, that was 5 years ago or 7 years ago or something like that. I sometimes don't remember exactly what it is, but man, boy, wouldn't it be terrible if I said something that, brought humiliation onto me? Or what if I said something that brought, the cancel culture on me? Or what if I said something that that was wrong or hurt someone? Wouldn't that be terrible? And I'll say this, yeah, it would. It would. That's not what I want, but I'm open to it because I put this podcast out there. I don't want it, but I have to be open to the possibility. Otherwise, I would never put this podcast up. And it's more important for me to put it up than to avoid a potential danger. Now, my perspective on that is if a potential thing happened, I'll figure it out because I'm bringing I'm utilizing and recognizing my resources, that I'm someone who can handle things when they come along. Maybe it means I need to ask help to somebody else. Maybe it means that I utilize my ability to have a conversation with someone and to resolve conflict or to own the hurt that I caused somebody and atone for it. But regardless, is that I'm owning the reality that I'm someone who can deal with it if it comes. OCD wants to hear you say, you can't trust yourself. Instead, you need to trust the absence of anxiety or the absence of potential or the absence of fear itself. And that's not how we live life. That's the OCD's lie. That's the anxiety's lie. Instead, it's this is uncomfortable and I'm going to do it anyways. And if it hits the fan, I'll figure it out. And I will. And also with that, then I'll know the circumstances of what I said and how and the context in which I said it, and I'll deal with it then. I'll figure it out. Because if I ruminate about it and think about it, oh man, what did I say? Blah, 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 blah. By the time that thing occurred, it's possible that the entire cultural mindset would have shifted and the zeitgeist of what is acceptable is now no longer, and vice versa. So, in other words, it's an entirely new scenario. I'll have to deal with it when I get there, and then I'll know the circumstances. Okay. You also said, Ed, here are you want some exposures. Okay. I got some exposure ideas for you. Now, number one thing, most important thing is not an exposure, but is to eliminate your compulsions, right? Now, your job is to think about what are all the things that you do that are kind of compulsive in nature, right? Remember, a compulsion is something that's going to avoiding or reduce anxiety or help you to avoid anxiety or to help you ensure, quote, ensure that that bad thing is not going to happen, whatever that may be, okay? So, wrote down some ideas of some potential things that may happen to you or to someone else who might be listening to this. So it could be, avoidance, reassurance seeking, obviously. All right. So asking friends for unnecessarily for support or affirmation, right? So sometimes we fish for that, right? We're looking for that reassurance and that support. Sometimes, emotionally, it's nice to get that affirmation, but if you're doing it to try to satisfy that feeling or to shut down that fear, that feared story, that vulnerability, resist that. All right. If you're checking or rechecking the thread, right, go back and rereading things. Another thing that can happen, you didn't say this, but I wonder if this is going on too at some points, changing your clothes to avoid ridicule. I've certainly worked with folks where they get dressed and they get this intrusive thought, oh man, someone might make fun of X. So they change. Even though they liked what they wore, they go back and they change it to avoid that ridicule. Maybe rereading emails or rereading communication. Man, I've worked with folks who have reread and reread and reread emails and changed and changed and changed and changed and taken stuff out and just to make sure that they didn't say anything weird, or that they go back and they reread emails that they had sent just to make sure that nothing was weird, or man, they analyzed the person's response to look for anything that could be a hint of ridicule, of hurt, or of humiliation. Is there rumination about past conversations, right? So sometimes you'll ruminate about this current conversation, and you scoured it enough, and your anxiety let you off the hook, and then it goes, but what about other conversations? You're not safe yet. Let's think about those and make sure that you didn't say anything weird there, right? So again, it's going to try to pull you back in some sort of way, and that's one way that it does it. Last as examples, rehearsing potential future interactions, right? So thinking about what you will say, what you will do in a future situation, and how you'll play out that scenario, right? This is an endless loop of things, right? So, because there's no way, like my example about maybe I said something on a podcast that it's going to land me in hot water. I can't predict all the things, but boy, I can imagine quite a bit. But I know that even if I thought about a million different scenarios, there's going to be one more that I haven't, and my brain is happy to accumulate those. Now, there's a number of other mental compulsions, and I have this list. That I put together that I've compiled from other places, but other mental compulsions that could be at play as well, right? So like mental avoidance or thought suppression, right, which is effortfully pushing a thought out of mind or attempting to just simply not have it, right? So it's just like no, don't think about don't think about the white elephant, right? All that does is it produces the thought, it maintains the thought, right? It doesn't get you what you want. It could be mental review. Mental review is playing and scrutinizing the past event for potential wrong, inappropriate, or harmful actions to find certainty that you did just the right thing, right? This may not be you exactly, Ed, but I think there's somebody else out there. Mental rehearsal, again, it's planning for that future event, making sure that you will do everything right, that you will say everything right, or that everything's going to be okay. Scenario twisting is kind of similar, right? That's where you're reflecting back and changing details from your memory of like, all right, if I changed this, what would happen? If I said this, what would be the effect of it, right? And this plays really well into mental rehearsal because then it's playing out into the future. Well, if I said this, it put me in this position, and now what will I do in the future? Lastly, that's self-reassurance, right? Just reminding yourself over and over and over again of something that would give you certainty or perceived safety, right? So we want to be cutting down on those. So once you pull back on those as much as you can, then build a hierarchy of all those situations that your brain gives you that potentially could lead to catastrophe, that could lead to humiliation, right? Start with the easy stuff and start working up, right? So I don't know where the hard stuff or the easy stuff is for you, but again, we're putting ourselves at risk, right? You don't need to go out and do something to cause humiliation, but I'm willing to bet that your brain has suggested situations or interactions or things you can do or things you can say that will that will lead to humiliation, right? So that's where we slowly start to practice those and put them to the test, right? We learn those things are unlikely to bring that catastrophe that you're afraid of, right? Some basic examples: wearing weird clothes, right? Wear bright colors, wear things that bring your attention to you, wear things that are like a fashion faux pas, whatever that means, wherever you are in whatever situation that you're in. That can be one of those things. Generally speaking, no one cares. That's what we learn. No one cares. Say bad slang. I love this one. Say old slang, like slang that no one's using anymore, or as an old guy, start using slang that like the kids are like. I have said once or twice to my kids 6, 7 because I know they hate it. But you can like I've also started saying the phrase the slang dope. Dope meaning cool. This was a thing that was used in the late 90s, early 2000s. So like when I was in high school, I say it now because it annoys my wife and I think it's hilarious. Is it nice? No. Is it hilarious to me? Yes. Point is, say bad slang. Ratchet is one of those. I heard someone say that once and I'm like, I hate that now and I hate it forever and always. And you know, it's still true. I still hate that one. There's a lot of other ones you can think of, but that's one way you can do. Intentionally tell bad jokes or tell groaner jokes, right? A groaner joke is like a bad like dad joke, right? I came across this one today, so I'm going to share it with y'all. I once had a fear of German sausage. I feared the worst. I think it's funny, but I'm a dad and I have to like these things. It's in my blood. So tell bad jokes, right? It's going to lead to the possibility of humiliation, but you know what you'll find? People will either giggle, they'll groan, but will they reject you? It's unlikely. Will it lead to that humiliation? Unlikely, right? Okay. Spending time with friends, basic and simple one, right? That's one where you could do something and then you're pulling back on anything that seeks reassurance or encouragement. Inviting friends over to your house, right? I don't know your living situation, but sometimes just having someone in your personal space can lead to a lot of humiliation or lead to a lot of potential humiliation, which also the compulsions for that might be like hiding things in your house, making sure that no one sees like the embarrassing things, right? Leave stuff out, right? Let them see you. That's the authentic part of you, right? The good, bad, and the ugly. That's who you are. And if your friends are going to humiliate you for that, well, heck with them. Lastly, this is a scary one for a lot of people. Showing people art or music or stories that you like, movies that you like or have created yourself. For some people, that can be just terrifying and leads to the possibility that maybe they're going to reject me for this very personal and vulnerable thing. But again, Ed, I don't know what those things are for you, but I'm going to encourage you to consider those things, make that list, and start facing those. If you have a therapist, work through some of those things, the likelihood of it, you can challenge the likelihood of those. But you know what? The best thing is try it, see what happens. Push through that anxiety and do it anyways and see what happens. You know what I bet's going to happen? Nothing. But you only find out when you try it. All right, Ed, that's what I got for you today. I hope this has been helpful to anybody else out there. I hope this was helpful as well. If you have recommendations or suggestions for Ed, message me and or put them on the episode page or whatever it might be, and I'll look forward to that. So, all right, everybody, until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered on a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye.